Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 26th of January, 2026, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Delighted to have Ben Rubin here in the studio with me.
Delighted to be here, Brian.
You had a good weekend in Torquay.
That was on Thursday.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, I was in Ivy Bridge on the weekend. I've got a little video I'm going to play later, actually.
Excellent. So staying local, meeting local people, this is always good. Well, we've got a very interesting and we think important news today. We're going to be having a look inside the deeper layers of politics. And in particular, we're going to be having a look at Davos again. We're going to be looking at remarks that Nigel Farage made. We think some of those very, very important comments. We're going to be having a look at the Institute of Government again to see who is planning what for the UK state and what that may mean for the future. And in particular, we're going to be focusing in on the phrase broken Britain. And is that the phrase that we should be using? And if so, why? Or indeed, why not? We're going to be having a look at the World Economic Forum. Well, you are, Ben. That's the AI apocalypse. We're going to be having a look at interfaith dialogue, plans for a national police force across England, which I think is England and Wales, very, very significant. We're going to be giving an update on the cruelty of the ongoing war in Ukraine, and we're also going to be having a look at Pax Judaica. So very interesting stuff. We've got a very, very turbulent political system internationally and in UK, and we're going to try and pick some of that apart today. But let's kick off with Nigel Farage. And here he is, looking very excited prior to his departure for Davos. But Nigel's overwhelming message to people supporting him and reform was, trust me. And this will be something for us to discuss today. Should you be trusting Nigel Farage on everything he says, or do we need to look a little bit deeper? Let's have a look at his own self-promotion clip about his visit to Davos.
The online conspiracy is running riot. Nigel Farage is going to Davos. He's become a globalist. Slow down. I spent 20 years going to the European Parliament. Never once did I change my views. In fact, they probably hardened. And yes, I am going to Davos, as is President Milei of Argentina and Donald Trump of the USA. And my message to Davos is going to be very, very simple. You guys, the globalists, have had it your way for far too long. British governments have been craven to you, rather pandering to you than standing up for the interests of British people and British workers. And I'm going to tell them, all of that is going to change. There is going to be a new government in Britain that puts British priorities first. So ask yourself a question. Would you rather I stayed at home, or rather I went and gave that honest message?
Well, there we are. There's Nigel Farage in his own words. And I'm going to say he's saying some really important things there, that he's going to take on the really, really powerful people who are running global policy, dealing with the World Economic Forum and Davos. He's going to take them on. He's going to get politics back to Britain looking after itself. And that's all there is to it. Well, is it as simple as that? Did he do a good job in the European Parliament? Often, yes, because he was introducing vital and very hard-hitting comment on the damage that the European Union was doing to UK. But whilst he was taking that enormous annual salary from the European Union, there was a lot going on in UK that Nigel Farage didn't appear to want to engage with. And let's not forget that after building up the momentum of UKIP, he then abandoned it to say he was leaving politics. In particular, he was getting a bit scared as to what was happening around him. And then suddenly he turned up on the world stage with Trump. So very, very difficult to know exactly what's going on in Farage's mind. Let's look at a separate video clip where he's being pretty specific that he's going to target welfare.
Basically said we won't increase spending in line with inflation. So for our programme to work, what we absolutely have to do is to say to people, we are going to reduce welfare spending. We are going to reduce excessive government waste. And I think if we do that, the markets will applaud it.
I think a lot of people would hear you on those sort of what we would say, microeconomic things that are going wrong. You say, I'm going to change these micro things. But if you're putting the whole system of the way that macroeconomic policy has been run in the country, particularly the independent fiscal watchdog, independent central bank, if that is in question when you walk into number 10, you don't think there's going to be an enormous amount of concern in international markets that will affect your ability to pay your debt?
Well, maybe people will think finally we've got a government that actually has within it people who've been in business, because we haven't got that now, and we haven't had much of it for many years.
It doesn't sound like you're very worried about having a repeat of a sort of Liz Truss type.
No, because we're going to cut spending. For example, you can now get benefits if you suffer from mild anxiety. Well, I have mild anxiety every morning. We've just reached a ridiculous level with all of this, and it can't go on. It just can't go on. We're looking at a benefits bill of 300 billion by 2030, something like that. So it can't go on.
So there we are. Obviously, that was just a clip out of all the things that he said in that interview with Stephanie Flanders from Bloomberg. Banks got mentioned, and he's going to cut back on profits for the banks, as we'll hear a little bit more of. But he's going to target welfare out of all the things which he discussed. What was he most hard hitting on, in my mind, that he was going to target welfare? So is this Nigel Farage going to look after ordinary people in UK, or is he simply on the trail of the money, Ben?
Well, I mean, the headlines there sound kind of interesting, right? But the thing is, banks are stripping out costs left, right and centre anyway. That's what all this artificial intelligence is doing. So they're not going to need the cost base they've currently got. So he's probably kind of going along with the tide on that front. Cutting benefits, I think that we could all agree that there's too much money going into the benefit system. I'm assuming that includes the NHS budget as well, that 300 billion, because that is an extraordinarily large number.
It's not clear on that.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, NHS spend could come down, I mean, by an order of magnitude, my personal belief is. But he's not talking really about any kind of serious economic policy. Like, where's actual economic growth going to come from?
Indeed, that's the case. Let's listen to this second clip, though, where there's more about the banks.
But you say you're going to do it. It's a part of your plan. It's not just part of your plan to discuss it.
No, we're going to do it.
At least 20 billion.
We're going to do it.
You're going to tax the banks 20 billion.
And some of the banks won't like it. You're quite right.
They will all pass on to their consumers.
Well, I don't like the banks very much, because they debanked me, didn't they? And wouldn't give me an account and try to force me out of the country. No, look, this will be tough for banks to accept. I get that.
But how do you think they're going to pay the 20 billion?
I'm sorry, but the drain on public finances is just too great.
But how do they make their money? If they don't make it there, don't you think... it's pretty clear. It's going to go on to interest margin. It's going to go on to the mortgage costs and the interest rates they charge your voters. Or they become more efficient, or they cut costs, or they do whatever. This money, they should not have had this money over... Look, frankly, the whole QE programme has not achieved anything very much, other than to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. And everything we've done on QE since George Osborne and co put it into place has been bad for most people in the country. That's been really helpful, because it's very clear. You're happy to have a very hefty extra tax on banks.
It's not a
more anti-bank than this government. Is that true?
It's not a tax. They're just not going to get free money anymore.
It's taking £20 billion from the banks. It doesn't really matter how you
They'll adapt.
They'll
adjust. Business does.
Right. You disagree with the Bank of England governor on that. If we have an election on schedule, there'll be a new Bank of England governor by the time you would become Prime Minister. They'd come in early 28. One of the other things that people are worried about is that you're actually questioning one of these key pillars of UK economic policy, one of the few stable pillars in the last 15 years or so, 20 years.
Well, given
the independent Bank of England. Will you let that new Bank of England governor continue in their full term?
Well, given what a catastrophe UK economic policy has been over the last 15 years, I think we should challenge every single tenet of it. And I think one of the biggest mistakes, look, we vote Brexit. Now, if you vote Brexit, use it as an opportunity to do things differently. And the trouble is, from day one, the Conservative government viewed it as a damage limitation exercise, as opposed to an opportunity. And Andrew Bailey is a perfectly polite, nice man, but they should have picked somebody who was a Brexiteer to be in charge of the Bank of England and to think totally differently, especially around financial markets, financial market regulation. We've ignored this.
So I think this was a very interesting dialogue, and certainly Stephanie Flanders for Bloomberg, they're absolutely desperate to protect the bankers. We shouldn't be taking any more money from the bankers. But the real debate under the surface of this, I think, is two things. Is one, who is actually creating the money? Who is pushing the money into the economy? Who's in control of it? Are the central banks truly independent? That's certainly a question which doesn't get discussed, which needs to be dealt with if Nigel Farage is actually going to be taking fiscal policy and economic policy under control. So that a lot of things don't come out, but certainly from the World Economic Forum, desperately to protect the banks and the idea that we have independent central banks. So Nigel Farage under quite a lot of pressure there, and he does come back with some fairly hard statements about the fact that quantitative easing, pouring money into the banking system in order to protect it from bad debts, caused huge trouble. He's saying the right words. Is he going to stick with it, Ben, do you think?
Well, difficult to say, really. But the fact that he called Andrew Bailey a nice, polite man, I think, is a bit of a red flag. He's an arch Fabian. We talked about that just before Christmas. Andrew Bailey's was president of the Fabian Society at Cambridge University, one of the top central bankers, not just in this country. Obviously, he's governor of the Bank of England, but he's on the board of the Bank of International Settlements. He's on the board of the G30. And the central banking system is really the head of the snake as it comes to global economics and really politics as well, because they pull a lot of the strings there. And then just a final thing on that 20 billion number, that does sound good, but he actually touched on something I was talking about after your first clip, which was about efficiency. Taking 20 billion back from the banks, but if they're saving 200, maybe more, through the implementation of new technologies, and actually they're getting a better deal than is being presented here. So that needs closer investigation.
Indeed, as is corruption within the banking system. We'll come on to that a little bit more in a minute. Now, in the next clip, Farage is onto the subjects of NATO, but he's also talking about foreign policy for Britain. Let's hear this one.
Look, of course, we understand collective strength through NATO and organisations like that. All right, I get that. But let's face it, the globalist idea that we should all do the same thing, have the same regulations, have the same targets, and the EU, of course, is the epicenter of all of this for the globalists. That's now for the birds. There's a change of debate. There is now something called national interest. And that's the new politics that you're seeing. That's the new approach that you're seeing.
I think a lot of people in this audience would say the conclusion from this week was that countries cannot go it alone, especially in their relationship with President Trump. They need to group together. And a lot of people in the UK will be thinking, in fact, we know from the polls that they want to be closer to Europe. But you're saying the opposite. You don't want to work with other countries, and especially not with Europe.
I'm very happy to work with other countries. I love Europe. I love Europeans. I just don't like Brussels and the terrible autocratic structures that it's built. I don't believe it's brought any benefits whatsoever. It may have been good for one or two big companies, but beyond that, it's been a failure, not a success.
It's been a little bit hard from this conversation to see where the direction would be.
An independent
UK foreign policy.
But this is the point.
Actually do
an independent United Kingdom chooses its own future, chooses its own relationships, makes its own decisions. We're doing it in trade policy. Trade policy is one example of what you can do if you're not part of a structure that tells you what you can and can't do. And that's what the EU was, and that's what the Brexit world's about. Making our own choices, making our own decisions. And yes, of course, in terms of defence, NATO is crucial, America is crucial. But you ask yourself a question. Has Donald Trump made NATO weaker or stronger over the last 10 years? And I would argue he's made NATO a lot stronger by waking Europeans up to the fact they couldn't go on having a free lunch.
So again, a very interesting mix of comments. So according to Nigel Farage, Davos has changed. All those people, they've dumped the idea of a global rules-based international system, and they've moved on to something about national independence. Do I believe that? I certainly don't. Does he think that, or is he just playing for the cameras? We don't know. And then as far as foreign policy is concerned, well, if Britain's in control of its own foreign policy, clear of the rules-based international order, presumably, we can make foreign policy as a nation state. Is it that clear, or is Nigel Farage manoeuvring through the atmosphere of Davos? Now, you've got an extra clip here, Ben, where you're actually looking at Nigel Farage and the aspect of thinking more globally. Let's have a look at that and see how these two bits fit together.
I just think we've underutilised the amazing advantages we have across the rest of the world. You know, we turned our backs on India, we turned our backs on the Commonwealth countries in the 70s. We decided that Europe was our future. That became the sort of foreign office and political priority over decades. And we've turned our backs on large parts of the world where there is still a remarkable relationship between those former colonies and ourselves. So we need to think more globally in every way.
Okay, so a little bit more detail. Are we going to be back in control of our foreign policy with Nigel Farage and reform? Who knows? We can't be unless we control the people making the global policy, and we can't control the people making the global policy unless we get the banks under control. And just to round that point home, let's just have a look at a comment here. This is from 2022 from the Bank of International Settlement Quarterly Review. They're talking on vast sums of money missing within the system. Non-banks outside the US owe 25 trillion in missing debt. Non-US banks, so upwards of 35 trillion. And if we go back to another report, Reuters here, obviously, but this was December the 6th, 2022, it's talking foreign exchange swap debt of 80 trillion, just a mere 80 trillion. We don't know what's happened to it. It's gone into hidden off-balance sheet dollar debt in financial exchange swaps. So vast amounts of money disappearing. Some examples coming up on the screen to do with Dutch pension funds, etc. And how the system works. But essentially 80 trillion disappears from the world system. But the banking system itself is independent, and we're going to rely on it in order to move forward. So lots of questions to be asked, and I'll put this one on the screen. This is from a UK column news report from 2022. But essentially, we're pointing out that the Bank of International Settlements is taking a leading role in coordinating the work of central banks on technological innovation. And it's basically working with the Bank of England, but you can't ask what's going on because it's all secret. And then basically, we've got Andrew Bailey, Governor of the Bank of England. As a central bank, we recognise the importance of innovation. So they're deep into innovation, but what they're not actually doing is sorting out the fraud and corruption in the banking system. And we can't ask questions about it because all of this is under diplomatic immunity and immense secrecy in Switzerland, the UK, and worldwide. So a lot of work for Nigel Farage to do, because he cannot change the globalist policy, he cannot change the World Economic Forum and Davos unless he deals with the corruption in the banking system. And one thing he did comment on was the Office of Budget Responsibility, which is supposed to be producing the detailed data for the Treasury. So I'm going to give him credit for that. And if we have a quick look at individuals connected, it's the normal revolving door of interest. But maybe we should just end on the fact that Nigel Farage attended Davos, but his bills were paid by an Iranian billionaire. It's this article in the the Financial Times brings this out. Reform UK leaders' pass and hotel costs for the World Economic Forum event were paid by Suzanne Khandahari. And if we look at a bit of detail on this gentleman and his family, with Iranian, basically we've got a $10 billion family trust. Now, his Nigel Farage working with that family? It's not too clear. It's not too clear in the article. And I don't think there's any doubt about the facilities being paid. But is Nigel Farage working on behalf of that billionaire? That is not clear, and it's certainly not proven in the Financial Times article. Now, compare what Farage said there at Davos with what we are actually seeing the Institute of Government talking about. And we would say that until we deal with what is destroying Britain from the inside, we cannot possibly move along with the policies that Nigel Farage says he wants. Let's look at what the Institute of Government had to say recently.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction, and welcome everyone here today. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to say a few words to introduce Darren Jones MP, Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister and Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Unsurprisingly, to any of you here, the Institute for Government agrees that government must think hard about the how as well as about the what. Without setting up the people, institutions and processes of government for success, no government is going to deliver for the voters. And that's why we were really pleased to see the creation of the Chief Secretary role at the centre of government and to learn about the decisions to clarify the structures there and to hear about the government's plans to make it easier for the public to access public services using digital tools, something that What Three Words knows all about. Of course, Labour is not the first government to talk about tackling public sector productivity or about making government more innovative and agile, and that's a point that Darren made at our conference last week. So the obvious question is, why will this time be different? What the IFG would say, based on 2 decades of research, is that what is important is what comes next. How the vision for reform that we hear about today is communicated across government, how political focus on these priorities is sustained, and how civil service leaders are held to account for delivering what ministers want to see.
So whether it is Greenland or Gaza, the war in Ukraine or the famine in Sudan, these challenges threaten not only our international security and that of our allies, but also make life more difficult for ordinary families across Britain. As the Prime Minister set out yesterday, this calls for strong British leadership abroad, but also a more active government at home. Because for too long, government hasn't worked the way it should. Everybody agrees that the status quo in our public services is not working. To quote a phrase the public will often refer to, the so-called broken state. That's why the public, politicians, and yes, civil servants are all frustrated by the pace of change. But this diagnosis is not new, and it's why the Prime Minister has asked for nothing short of a complete rewiring of the state.
So there we are. So while Davos goes on, and apparently we're going to tackle the globalist policy inside, UK is being hollowed out, and we've now got massive change coming in through Keir Starmer. But notice also the broken state expression, and let's mirror this with the fact that Nigel Farage also saying Britain is broken, but UK column is going to challenge this very much. Is it broken Britain, or is it Britain that's been deliberately broken from the inside? And we absolutely say that's the case. And until the attack on the UK from the inside is dealt with, there's going to be no change to the standing of this country. So over to you, Ben.
Well, how do we fix it? They think that pouring loads of technology into the mix is going to sort everything out. That seems to be the hypothesis that they're pushing ahead with. And a lot of that's being driven by this chap on the left-hand side, Alex Karp, the founder, chief executive of Palantir here at the World Economic Forum last week, talking to Larry Fink, the CEO, founder of BlackRock. And Karp is a fascinating character. We talk about him all the time, and at the centre of this transformation of the British state. Palantir is deeply embedded into the NHS and increasingly more and more facets of the civil service, and is really kind of eating the system from the inside. I'm not going to show any clips. I'll just mention a couple of the points that he raised, and I'm going to talk a bit about what Elon Musk talked about as well. But essentially what Karp was saying to Fink is that government is their core business. They work with all sovereign nations who can work with the US. So this is the Western sphere of influence ultimately. And a lot of that centered around Israel ultimately as well, because that's where I believe it's probably reasonable to say a lot of Karp's interest lies. This is rooted in warfare and battlefield technology. And what these systems do, to use the terminology directly from this interview, is to take out the fat, as he calls in the system, so that actual workers can be elevated. So that fat is the white collar tier. That's the management tier that has been stripped out and completely replaced by these algorithms. So everyone inside these organizations is now subservient to technology, right? And that's where a lot of the higher paid jobs were. That's where the managerial class was, the professional classes. That's been destroyed by the technology that has been developed and deployed by Alex Karp. And Fink actually says to him, is this going to destroy jobs? And he says, yes. It's going to destroy jobs. And the note that I wrote to myself on a piece of paper, by the way, Alex Karp, I wrote something down on a bit of paper with a pen. We have these pens, you see, we can write on the paper. It's quite a good technology, actually. What I wrote down to myself was, the machine wins and the soul loses. And I think that's probably quite apt as it relates to Palantir. I'll just touch on Musk as well. We'll provide links to these interviews. You should go and watch them. They're only kind of half an hour long. It's worthwhile to get some insight into what these people are thinking. Musk is... if nothing, quite entertaining, I've got to say it. So he opened with a quip saying that he only came to Davos because he'd heard about this thing called the Board of Peace. But he thought it was spelt Piece, because you get a piece of Greenland and a piece of Venezuela and a piece of Gaza, which, although it was a kind of throwaway remark, I think that's probably quite revealing, actually, and maybe a little bit of a glimpse into the way that Donald Trump sees the world and how all these people see the world. But what was he there to talk to think about? Abundance for all, which can only be delivered by artificial intelligence and robotics produced by people like Elon Musk, ultimately. And his vision is a future where artificial intelligence will be smarter than humans than a human this year. And by 2030, will be smarter than all humanity collectively.
That's reassuring.
You'll have an AI and what he wants to do is to put AI data centers in space, so they'll be orbiting the Earth. And we will then have this super intelligent AI running on solar power from deep space 24/7 that will then become like this new technological deity, I guess.
And we'll be happy. Everybody will be well fed, watered and happy.
And there'll be more robots than humans. I don't know. It sounds... I don't know if it sounds pretty out there to me, but it doesn't sound like any kind of future that I want to live in. And the other thing that I really noticed this year was this kind of consumerization of Davos. And we had people like this chap turning up. So this is Stephen Bartlett from The Diary of a CEO, big YouTube channel. So he was there. The kind of content creators and influencers were out in force, and the BBC was beginning to give real coverage to the Davos agenda. And I think that this is all part of the propaganda push, the reputational sell.
Because they're under pressure.
They're absolutely under pressure, and they need people to go along with this. Yeah. So lots to go. And I'm going to still be looking at stuff coming out of Davos all through this week, to be honest with you, because there's so much material, so many people speaking there.
So I would just reinforce that. So good news in there, in the UK column News today, that basically it is clear that people driving the global agenda are under huge pressure, huge and increasing pressure. They're running behind time with their plans, and they're also getting wobbly when you hear them in interviews. So this needs more pressure from the mass of mankind in order to destabilise what's happening.
Agreed. We've got to get organised, though, and we do have a fight on our hands. One final segment from the World Economic Forum, one that really jumped out at me, actually. This clip has been doing the rounds, which relates to this discussion. This is the Advancing Interfaith Dialogue for Peace session. If we can just get that up on screen, we can see there that's Mohammed Al-Issa, Secretary General of the Muslim World League, and Pinchas Goldschmidt, who's the Chief Rabbi of Moscow, amongst other things. And of course, as you'd expect for an interfaith dialogue for peace, there was a lot of talk of peace, a lot of talk of dialogue, a lot of talk of tolerance and education, and then also this remarkable clip about the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe.
Your Eminence, especially in Germany, you are facing a rise of anti-Semitism, but we are facing this all over the world. So I would like to hear what is your perspective on this.
The 7th of October has created turbulence in the whole world, a tremendous rise of anti-Semitism, organized, state-sponsored, in many instances, in universities, on the streets, and a rise of 500%, maybe some instances to 1,000% of anti-Semitic acts. And there has also been a reaction of Europe. I think the rise of the extreme right in many European countries is a response to the insecurity felt by the old Europeans, so-called old Europeans, regarding the new immigrants who came from the Middle East. So I think that fighting Islamophobia and anti-Semitism is an interest of both religions and both communities, and when we do it together, it's going to be much more useful. We have created, under also the Saudi umbrella, more than 10 years ago, the Muslim Jewish Leadership Council, and which was successful. And we believe that we have to go this way if we want to make sure that every European can live in peace and walk in peace in the streets.
So, Ben, I have to ask, was there a Christian input in that panel?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. So
absolutely not.
I think I'm right in saying so. The largest world religion not represented by the World Economic Forum.
No, and particularly in Europe, right? So they're talking about Europe, because Europe is Christian Europe. And there was a number of things that jumped out at me just from that little segment alone. Again, we'll provide a link. You should go and watch the whole thing. Is that the main outcome of October 7th is an increase in anti-Semitism. That's our primary concern about what's gone on since October 7th, 2023. He refers to the rise of the extreme right being down to the insecurity of the old Europeans. Europeans.
They're a problem, aren't they?
Oh, I know, yeah.
They can remember what life used to be like. Yes. Dangerous people.
Absolutely. And this idea that the new Europeans in the brave new world that we're moving into are the ones that are coming in from the Middle East and also further afield, not just from the Middle East, but that's what he referred to. And also that he has established under the Saudi umbrella this organisation, which is the Muslim Jewish Leadership Council, that I'm just going to have a quick look at now. So this was set up in 2016 with the aim of freeing religious people and religions from prejudice, false claims, attacks and violence, so that each religious tradition has the right and duty to contribute to European society. And it is co-chaired by Mufti Nedzad Grabus, who's got great headgear, by the way. I think the Muslims are definitely out in front when it comes to head.
It's very smart, I have to say.
Absolutely. And then you've got the Rabbi Pinchas there in the centre, Chief Rabbi of Moscow, and then three others on the leadership team. So you've got Rabbi Shlomo Hofmeister, who I think has got a very cool name and also a very cool hat. And then this chap on the left-hand side, Michael Shudrik, who's the Chief Rabbi of Poland, has been since 2004, and he's worked extensively since 1998, so nearly 30 years, with the Ronald S. Lauder Foundation in Warsaw. And Ron Lauder is a fascinating character because as soon as you start getting into the world of international Jewry, he pops up because he is the president of the World Jewish Congress. We spoke about him at the back end of last year, not least because of his fondness for the current Syrian president, Ahmed al-Sharaa, a.k.a. Jalani, who is a former
Terrorist,
ISIS commander, essentially, likes beheading people and all the things that kind of go along when you're venturing into that territory. And what Lauder's here talking about the positive discussion that he had with Jelani about normalisation between Israel and Syria. And maybe this tells us something quite significant about the relationship between Judaism and Islam that's being pushed forward by the World Economic Forum. I don't know.
It's certainly very complex, and it's certain that a lot of questions need to be asked. But this is a key part of our reporting, is to lift the stones so that people can see what's actually happening instead of what mainstream media is reporting, so that we can ask the key questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And read between the lines of some of the things that are happening in terms of terror-related activity in this country and further afield, for example. Now, just a couple more points on this, because he said that this new body that has been established has been set up under a Saudi umbrella, and we've known for quite some time that Saudi Arabia has been funding the spread of particularly radical forms of Islam across the rest. And that relates to the establishment of radical mosques all across the UK, not just in this country, but further afield. But this report, which comes from 2018, references a piece of work done by the Henry Jackson Institute. And the Henry Jackson Institute was the initial vehicle for the creation of the Council for Inclusive Capitalism, which was set up by Linda Rothschild in 2015, I believe it was, who's actually herself on the board of Estee Lauder. So Ron Lauder's family business, she's on the board of, and Ron Lauder's brother, Bill Lauder, is also on the board of the Council for Inclusive Capitalism. So there's quite a mix going on here. And then finally, this entire thing relates directly back to the Drumlanrig Accords that I spoke about back in October last year, which is the Muslim-Jewish Reconciliation Accords, a framework of reconciliation, understanding and solidarity, signed in the presence of Charles III, almost exactly a year ago today. I think it was on the 15th and 16th of January last year. And just to reinforce the question that you asked a moment ago, Brian, my question is, where are all the Christians in this?
Well, they appear to be excluded, or we could look at the Christian community and say that there's not enough oomph, there's not enough political awareness in the Christian community under the Anglican Church, for example, to actually get involved in these types of very important discussions, because the people who are absent from the discussion, of course, have no say in the policies that result from them. So lots of questions to ask. But overall, lots of things that we need to see and understand about the power behind the creation of not only globalist policy, but national policy. Well, as we always do, let's say a huge thank you to those who are supporting the UK column financially. If you're a member with us, or if you're donating, or you're a lifetime member, we can only do what we do because of your financial support. So a huge thank you to everybody who's helping the UK column. We'd like to grow numbers. So if you're not yet on board with a membership, follow the yellow arrow, click here on our website, and you can sign up as a member, or indeed you can make a donation or visit the UK column shop. So do have a think about that. Now, just to highlight the information that UK column does put out, website is packed full of news, written articles, interviews, and much else beside. But I just wanted to draw people's attention to this interview back in July 2022, when I was talking to Trevor Kitchens specifically on the subject of Forex and the banking fraud. So if you don't understand this part of the deep financial system, just put that into the search bar on the UK column website and find that interview. Now, tonight at 7 p.m, we've got The World is Controlled by a Criminal Syndicate, and that's Germ Warfare's podcast with Catherine Austin Fitz. Very, very timely, and I think the title of that is absolutely on the button, because that's certainly what we think we're looking at. And this one's also very interesting. Tonight at 9 p.m, the day the rules-based order died, Canada's revolt and the end of US hegemony. hegemony. That's Carl Zaar's Silk and Steel podcast, and he's going to be talking to Ina Tangen, senior fellow at CIGI. And actually, if I've got this correct, this will be giving us a look into some of the institutions who have been clustered around the rules-based international order. So this one should be very interesting. Do tune in at 9 p.m. this evening. Now, I also just want to give a little bit of a heads up that UK column teams recently completed a series of interviews with the survivors from the abuse which took place at Fornethi Residential School in Scotland. It's a really unique series of interviews. It is 2 hours 20 long. These ladies, great courage to speak out about their experiences and the trial that's just taken place. So we're saying to our audience, watch out for that, because we'll be streaming it soon. And back to you, Ben, on the growing police state, I think, in UK.
Right, absolutely. So the Institute for Government video that Brian showed a few moments ago talked about centralisation of power into Cabinet Office. Well, there's a lot more centralisation happening. This monolith of a state is accruing power at an extraordinary pace. And just over the weekend, we've seen the introduction of what has been billed as the British FBI. That sounds great, doesn't it? We really need one of those. British FBI will free up forces to tackle everyday crime, Home Secretary says. So this is a new body, the National Police Service, that is going to bring the work of existing agencies such as the National Crime Agency and the Regional Organised Crime Units under the same organisation. Right, so massive centralisation of power in the police service. And this is all because, according to the Home Secretary, the current policing system is broken. Here's that word again.
Broken. Nobody broke it. It was just the incompetence of the population of the UK.
Yeah.
They slowly fell asleep and allowed the country to fall apart. That is not the case. What has happened is Britain has been broken apart from the inside. It's very easy to see. This is very sinister. And I'd just like to say here, Ben, that a few years ago, we saw the centralisation of the police north of the border in Scotland. And what that meant was the creation of one unified police system, Police Scotland. And has this got problems and issues? Absolutely, because if you have any corruption within the police force itself, it will investigate itself. Whereas if you have different police forces spread across the country, at least you can bring in a remote police force to investigate wrongdoing amongst the police. So on that thing alone, Ben, some really worrying implications. But this is the creation of a state policing system, isn't it? This is not about bobbies protecting members of the public. This is about the state controlling the population through a militarised police system.
Yeah, absolutely. And doing it completely off script as well, because none of this was in the Labour manifesto, was it? I don't think that no one voted for this, the creation of a new FBI for the UK. It's all being done in an extraordinary fashion, right? So I'll get our esteemed Home Secretary up on screen. This is her at the NPCC conference last year. And interestingly, you can see the National Police Chiefs Council is actually sponsored by PwC. See the PwC logo just poking out of her derriere there on the bottom right-hand side, who are a World Economic Forum strategic partner. So you can get a sense of where the new strategy for policing is coming from.
Just to reinforce that, a corporate entity which is there sponsoring, as you say, what the National Police Chiefs Council is doing here.
Yeah. Amazing. And the NPCC, interestingly, was the only place that I could actually find any kind of formal communication about this development over the weekend. So there's a BBC article, but and various other newspapers picked this up, as it was a big development. But there's no formal address, no formal statement on a .gov website or from Mahmood at all. Apparently, there's something coming out later on today, but this is all just being done by press release.
Right. And Ben, if I may, and I'm going to support Nigel Farage here, which is very rare of me to do. But one of the things that he did in pushing back against Stephanie Flanders, the lady interviewing him from Bloomberg, was to say it was obvious to him that very little was being discussed on the House of of Commons, on the floor of the House of Commons, and also that the committees were incompetent and not doing their jobs. And certainly I'd absolutely agree with him.
Yeah.
And this topic itself has not come up in the House for your MP to understand what's really being proposed.
Right, and this is an enormous shift. So we got Mahmood at the MPCC conference, and then, as I said, the only place I could find formal communication was through this joint statement from counter-terrorism policing, the Met, and the MPCC, essentially saying that our organisations operate in an environment where crime is becoming increasingly complex, digitally enabled and dangerous. Terrorism, hostile state activity, organised criminal networks, now more interconnected than ever. They demand a policing model that is agile, capable and resilient, and that is going to be the National Police Service. So this is about the integration of police, and it's the top tier, right? So this is the real in-depth, intelligent investigation work all being centralised into one place, right? And this is part of a trend. It's not the only thing that's happening in terms of centralisation. They're actually looking at reducing the number of police forces across the country as well. So this came out a few days before the announcement about this new FBI type body. Mahmoud is pledged to significantly cut the number of forces from its current level of 43 down to what could potentially be just 12 mega forces. And do you think that those will be completely aligned to the metro regions? I think they probably will be, won't they?
I suspect so.
Yeah, that will fit quite nicely, won't it? I wonder if that's coincidence or if that's just, accident.
Well, we'll find out in due course.
Yeah, potentially we will. Rather concerningly, Shabana Mahmood has said some extraordinary things as well. Apart from all this policy that we're talking about, she's actually made some unbelievable statements over the past couple of weeks as it relates to justice and policing in the UK. I'll direct your attention to this article from the Telegraph, billed the Minority Report policing to catch criminals before they strike. Minority Report, obviously a film came out, goodness, probably 25 years ago, which essentially was about tackling pre-crime. And you think that this is science fiction. It's really not. And they quote an interview that the Home Secretary did with Tony Blair last month, where she said that AI and technology can be transformative to the whole of the law and order space. When I was in justice, my ultimate vision for that part of the criminal justice system was to achieve, by means of AI and technology, what Jeremy Bentham tried to do with his panopticon. That is, the eyes of the state can be on you at all times.
Yeah.
That's what they're pushing towards. And this is what all of this is about.
And that is a state that we've already been describing at the beginning of UK Column News, which is essentially utterly corrupt and incompetent, but it's going to be watching you, the individual, to see that you are running your life correctly.
Exactly.
The hypocrisy, apart from anything else, is breathtaking.
Right.
But
absolutely. And just to kind of reinforce the point, for those who are unfamiliar with the concept of the panopticon, it came from an 18th century philosopher called Jeremy Bentham, who promoted this idea of a circular prison with a central inspection tower from which a single guard could observe all inmates all the time while remaining unseen. And it has actually been built. Here's an example of it. I believe this is in Holland. You can see the central tower in the middle and then all of the cells which are completely open all of the time. And actually, let's just reinforce the point that this is a prison. We're not supposed to be living in a prison. We're supposed to be living in a free society. Maybe someone should tell the Home Secretary. And also, I do rather wonder if this has got anything to do with the interfaith dialogue that the Home Secretary was involved in herself towards the end of last year, but I don't know.
Well, again, we don't know because nothing is debated in openly in front of the public. It's all decided in meetings and closed door events which the public is not privy to. So lots of questions to be asked. What do we think is being constructed? It appears UK is taking the slow slide into some form of fascist state. So on one hand, we're being told, don't worry, the a rules-based international order, or the New World Order, is collapsing. That's apparently the message at Davos, according to Farage. But here in UK, the tightening up goes on. And this is certainly, I think, a very worrying development. So people should be aware of that. Let's move over to the subject of Ukraine, because, of course, the war in Ukraine has driven a lot of the international turbulence in Europe and the friction between EU and NATO, and indeed within NATO and also with the United States. What is the key problem? Well, the key problem is it's now absolutely clear that Ukraine has lost the war. Yes, the fighting still goes on, but the reality is that Ukraine has essentially lost the war, and Russia is demonstrating that it's capable of continuing to fight and destroying Ukrainian infrastructure with weapon systems to which the West does not have any counter. Let's just have a listen to retired Colonel Douglas Macgregor in an interview here.
The question is, if you're losing a war and there's absolutely no evidence that anything you can do will change that outcome, why would you take such irrational steps? Now, we know you pointed out something just a second ago. If you go back and look at Crimea, when the Russians opted to seize it very suddenly and very quickly, what people didn't know is that there were great plans in NATO to occupy Crimea, to use the naval facilities there for the very purpose that you outlined, to turn the Black Sea into a NATO lake, if you will. But the bottom line is that we've unambiguously failed in Ukraine. There's an unwillingness to admit this truth. And if we persist in provoking, as we are doing right now and have been doing for months, frankly, we will eventually get a reaction. And we may not like that reaction. Because let's be frank, we are not prepared for a major war with Russia. But Russia is prepared for a major war against us. And I think people in Washington have lost sight of that. There's something else here, too, that we shouldn't lose sight of. We have a problem in this country. It's an infatuation with air power. Air power is the equivalent of sex without consequences. You can bomb or missile attack people on the ground. There's no real response against you sitting in the United States or sitting in Western Europe. Nobody has the air defenses to stop you. You don't really accomplish anything other than alienating and offending people. But it feels good to the politicians in Washington that we're able to do that with impunity. Well, that's worked with Iraq. It's worked in Libya. It works in Africa. It's worked in many places. But it's not going to work with the Russians.
So very wise words from Colonel Macgregor. Russia has won the war. The fighting is going to go on until Ukraine stops receiving support from the West. But at the end of the day, the West knows that they've been beaten, and that is the combined arms of the European Union together, actually, with the Americans. It has absolutely failed. And in the meantime, the slaughter goes on the battlefield. And of course, as the Ukrainian military breaks down, so losses increase. But before we have a look at some of those losses, we'll just have a little look at this clip showing some of the horrors of events on the battlefield. Let's see if we can play this. And drones, of course, are being used now to flush out Ukrainians from the last of their defensive positions around key towns and key lines where the Russians are moving forward. Ukrainians also using drones, but the Russians have the upper hand. And this is the horror of the warfare. This is a Russian drone attacking an assembled group of Ukrainians. And this little clip here is going to show a 3,000 kilogram Russian bomb being used to deploy an assembly point of Ukrainians. And this is where the war is now so cruel, because Russia has ample of these weapons to destroy Ukrainian strongholds before it moves forward. Look at the size of that explosion. The killing radius is truly vast due to the shock wave, but also Russia is capable of moving into where the Ukrainians are trying to hide military vehicles, to just been indicated there within civilian infrastructure, but the accuracy of the drones can still locate those vehicles. So the war goes on, Ukraine becoming more fragile, the economy destroyed to a large extent through the Russian attacks on the infrastructure. And on the battlefield, we just really see the horrific killing going on because the West will not admit that its adventure in Ukraine is over. This last clip, very important. This shows the height to which the drone war has got to, where you now have drones attacking other drones in the air. This is technology which the West is desperate to catch up on because at the moment it's clear that it's been outproduced and outdeveloped by Russia and its arms industry, and that has a particular significance. But if we just look here at Ukrainian deaths. Now, this is one of the websites that was pointed out to me as being fairly accurate. On the left, you've got a scale going up to between 1,000 and 1,200, and these are weekly deaths, it's claiming. Many of the other statistics would indicate a lot more. But in the course of the war so far, according to this website, 177,000 Ukrainians dead already. But what you can't see is more or less an equivalent number missing in action. These people have just disappeared on the battlefield. This can often be the result of very heavy shelling or very big bomb blasts where people literally disappear. And so horrific casualties funded by the West, and the killing goes on. If we get into this particular website, we can actually see that as is being done by the BBC in Russia, people in Ukraine trying to track their own citizens that have been killed. And I can tell you these pages go on and on and on. And what they also tell you is the average age of the men being killed is 38 years. If we have a look at the latest American National Defense Strategy document, particular statistic caught my eye, and this was prompted by Trump. The source is actually from the World Bank 2024, but it's basically the spend on military equipment, on military and defense in the West compared to Russia. Now, this does not include the US, so it's non-US NATO, 26 trillion being spent on defense compared to Russia's 2 trillion, but Russia is wiping the floor with NATO in Ukraine. What this suggests, Ben, is that the fraud and corruption in the military-industrial complex in the West is truly mind-blowing. 26 trillion disappearing where we haven't even got the wherewithal of the equipment to fight in Ukraine. But the war over, in as much as there's no doubt that Russia is now fully in control, and this is why Russia does not need to reach any agreement because it is in control on the battlefield. So truly horrible that Keir Starmer and the other Western leaders are allowing this destruction to take place.
That is extraordinary, isn't it? Absolutely extraordinary. Yeah.
Where does that take us?
That takes us to, just to wrap up, I would like to draw people's attention to this video. Well, this is a still from the video. It's a presentation by Benjamin Netanyahu at the AIPAC conference in 2018. And he's talking about what I view as the projection of imperial power by Israel, politically, economically, industrially. And he talks about turning the map blue. And you can see all of the countries on there that he views as blue on the side of Israel. Isn't that fascinating?
It is fascinating. And I'd like to know what is in his mind. Does he mean these are countries that have got exceptional support for Israel? Or are these countries that he now believes that Israel has got such a controlling hand within their national political system that it's hard to tell whether it's the national government in control or Israel? I know there's a lot of people who won't like that question, but I think it's reasonable to ask.
It's absolutely reasonable to ask. I mean, the man standing on stage presenting the world as being something that's controlled by him and his government, ultimately. And the reason this has come to light in the past couple of weeks is because of this little clip, which we can take a look at now.
By the way, what are we doing with Greenland? We got to do something with Greenland. Where's my advanced team? Go to Greenland. They must have some satellite needs or something that we could do there. But we're coloring the world blue.
What is going on with Greenland?
Just to qualify that was from 2018.
That's from 2018.
2018.
Yeah.
And Netanyahu, with all his problems, is pointing a finger at Greenland and saying we should be paying attention to it.
We should be paying attention to it. And then within 12 months, we have this from Trump. So Trump starts talking about Greenland. So obviously this has come to the foreground again in the past few weeks, but actually it's not the first time that Trump's been talking about it. He's always, he does this. He makes these jokes. Oh, we're going to put a casino up there,
Truly horrible.
Or maybe they've got other ideas for it. I don't know. Let's have a little listen to this clip from the Golden Girls in 1987.
At 2 a.m, waiting for George to come home, I called a radio talk show. I gave them the solution to the crisis in the Middle East.
Giving the Palestinians Greenland? You heard it? I didn't know that was you. You were great.
Giving the Palestinians Greenland?
It's a big place. Nobody uses it.
You would take a desert people and put them in the ice and snow?
With the proper clothes, they'll be fine.
Just a coincidence, Ben.
Maybe.
From 1987.
From 1987. Maybe we've got a glimpse into next week's controversy. Let's see what the Board of Peace have to say.
Indeed, a lot to think about there, but we must end today's UK column news.
Well, I've got my little clip of my little walk. So can we drag that up?
Of course.
Okay, very good. So this was me in Ivy Bridge over the weekend, just on the edge of Dartmoor, and just look at that river. Raging
like the world's political system.
Exactly. I thought it was quite poetic, actually. That given in the context of everything going on.
Looks beautiful. Okay, well, a huge thank you to all of our viewers, wherever you are in UK or worldwide. Huge thank you to everybody supporting UK Column financially. Our objective is to grow from 2026, so do help us to do that. Join the community to get a feeling that you are part of us and you help us to produce the news we do. I also want to say, people, stay calm, carry on, but do tackle the issues that we're bringing forward on the news wherever you can. And lastly, I'd like to say to people supporting Reform Party, we know a lot of you are doing very good work within local politics, and we hope that UK Column news and analysis and data will be helping you focus on what are the really important issues to tackle, whatever the leadership of Reform would have you believe. So let's end on that positive note. We will be back in a few minutes for UK Column Extra, and we'll see you again for another news at 1 o'clock on Wednesday. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Ben. Bye-bye.